Farron, let's start with this story about your attorney general there in Florida. I'm speaking, of course, about Pam Bondi. This is a story that we heard a little bit about several months ago, but it's come back around.
Well, I'm really happy that it's actually finally back out there in the ether again. It's something we had covered back when it first broke. But basically, when we're looking at a pay to play here in the state of Florida, when Pam Bondi was seeking re-election, right as she was, deciding whether or not to investigate Trump University for scamming students in the state of Florida if they wanted to join that investigation, Donald Trump comes in with a $25,000 donation. Suddenly, investigation dropped. And there's some, discrepancies between what Donald Trump has said about this situation and what Bondi says, because Trump claims never spoke to Bondi, never talked with her. This was just a donation to help her out. On Bondi's part, they claim that her campaign reached out to Donald Trump specifically and asked for the money, asked for some fundraising help, and got it from Donald Trump. And what we're talking about is bribery. I mean, that's the way this is being looked at now. CREW, the Citizens for Responsibility Ethics in Washington, has filed a bribery complaint with the Federal Election Commission, hoping that they will look into this and understand that it is a very clear pay to play in this situation. The money was given from the Trump Foundation, a nonprofit, tax-exempt organization, to Pam Bondi with the express intent, according to CREW, of squashing this Trump University investigation. And in terms of, the law, it does not get more cut and dry than that. That is bribery if you're able to prove this quid pro quo here. And that's exactly what CREW is trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear. There's multiple scandals here, frankly. The first is the sort of the most obvious one. That is Donald Trump University was being considered for investigation even before Bondi took office in 2011. The previous Florida Attorney General, Bill McCollum, had received a lot of complaints on Trump University, as a lot of attorney generals have. In fact, we have multiple investigations around the country as a function of Trump University. So, and Farron, how this works. An attorney general's office, they have basically different silos of potential or active cases. And some cases are, they're determining whether or not they're going to actually start an investigation. Some are already being investigated, there is an investigation. Now, obviously, before something becomes a formal investigation, they do a little bit of noodling around, and which, I think in layperson's terms, we would call an investigation. But it's not, technically. And the reason why I make this point is, if you watch Pam Bondi, when she has been on TV over the past week, denying that there was any relationship between the $25,000 she sought and got from Donald Trump and her subsequent quashing of the Trump University investigation, she will say, she's a lawyer now, folks, she knows how to parse her words. She will say, I had no knowledge of an investigation of Donald Trump University. Well, that's because there was not one. Because the question on the table was in fact whether or not the Attorney General should start an investigation. So she's very clever here when she's issuing these denials. She's not saying, I wasn't aware that there were complaints. She's not saying, I wasn't aware that my office was considering whether or not it would go forward with an investigation. And you can bet if an Attorney General's office is looking at complaints and making a decision as to whether or not to launch an investigation, the Attorney General, when it comes to Donald Trump, is going to know one way or the other. And so, and then the other scandal, like you mentioned, is not just that there could have been this bribery, but that the money came from a supposed charitable institution. and if you dig into how they reported it, they didn't. It was hidden. And the only reason why the money showed up was because it showed up on Pam Bondi's disclosures, not on the charitable organizations. And that's why this story came back, because the IRS made Trump pay a fine, $2,500. Obviously, it's chicken feed, but acknowledging that, like, hey, you're not supposed to use a charitable organization to give money to an attorney general, never mind one that may or may not be investigating you. And then the third scandal here is the whole fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago, which took place months later, where the state did not acknowledge the value of a function hall at Mar-a-Lago for the actual price that it would be worth if you were holding a fundraising there. Now, this is pretty stunning, because you have this crappy foundation that Donald Trump has that nobody can seem to find out where he gave, what it's given money to, other than Pam Bondi. And all we hear in the press is about the Clinton Global Initiative, which, you know, by every charitable third-party charity rater has done quite well. Now, you may say that there's a commingling of interests and whatnot. That's a different story. But in terms of the legitimacy of a foundation, there's no comparison, and there's never been a charge. I mean, this isn't even, and you see Trump surrogates going on there saying this is part of the process. This is one of the things he fights against. Look, Donald Trump's already said he gives money to politicians to get them to do what they want. Well, this isn't I get access and so I get my policy wishes championed by this politician. This is going and paying a cop to basically not arrest you after you've committed a crime.
Well, what's interesting here, again, when we talk about the timing of this, we're looking at polls in Florida. Hillary Clinton is obviously still ahead, but that lead in the state of Florida is starting to shrink a little bit. So for Donald Trump, this is really bad timing for this story to come back out there, and be discussed and have a spotlight shown on it, because he was starting to gain a little bit of ground, and this could help to swing the polls back in Hillary Clinton's direction, because obviously, just like in past elections, Florida plays a huge role, very big swing state, a lot of electoral votes, and so if this hurts Trump in Florida, it's going to, possibly derail the entire Trump campaign, because Hillary's still ahead in Ohio, Pennsylvania. Texas is considered a swing state at this point. So Trump needs Florida, and this is not going to help him at all win over some voters here.
Look, this goes beyond the election. I mean, I would imagine right now, and I certainly hope, that there are reporters in Florida filing the state equivalent of a Freedom of Information Act, because there is no doubt that there are memos internal to the Attorney General's office discussing the disposition of the case against Trump University. I mean, and the question is Pam Bondi's name on any of those memos? Because she's claiming she had no knowledge of Trump University, of any investigation. Of course, like we say, there wasn't an investigation. There was a question as to whether or not they were going to launch one. But if she's on those memos suggesting we should, no, don't worry about the Trump University, after she's received this $25,000 check and, I guess, presumably a promise of and I'll hold a fundraiser for you at Mar-a-Lago, which is basically saying I'll be your bundler for you. Yeah. Then Pam Bondi has some major questions to ask. I mean, like I say, folks, go back, look at Pam Bondi's face when she's on on Fox Business, supposedly a safe haven, answering questions about this. This is not someone who is confident that they have done the right thing in this situation. I think there's a lot more to this story, and it's going to implicate a lot more than just this election. I mean, this is bribery, folks. And Donald Trump has publicly stated he gives money to politicians to get them to do what he wants them to do. Well, when you're asking Attorney General not to investigate your criminal fraudulent activity, then I think, that's something that other investigators tend not to overlook. So this is a real question as to whether or not this is going to die down.